Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the new P&L Principles and Leadership in Business podcast series. I'm Kelly Bewers, today's guest host on the new P&L this week, and I'm very grateful you've taken the time to join us today for a very special roundtable on reimagining entrepreneurship. Just before we start, if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or another platform and you like what you hear, please take a moment to review us. It all helps our ratings and rankings. If you'd like to ensure you never miss another episode of the new P&L, go to principlesandleadership.com and subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. We believe business needs a new P&L, one that is focused as much on principles and leadership as it is on profit and loss. Because we know if your principles are right and align with your purpose, and your leadership has a clear vision, focus, strength, and empathy, then your business will be in profit and not loss in so many ways. This week, I'm very pleased to be joined by Bayo Adelaja, Sana Shafi, and Alice Moxley. A very warm welcome to the new P&L. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Our topic today is reimagining entrepreneurship. There's been a lot of talk about building back better, with business leaders, organisations and think tanks contributing ideas and concepts to paint the picture of a better future. But today we want to focus on the doers, those who are taking action and willing to fail in pursuit of reimagining business. In particular, at times of crisis, entrepreneurs are often seen as the leaders who can emerge with new solutions and innovations. We're going to explore what it means to be an entrepreneur, who gets to be one, how we create the conditions for entrepreneurship, and if there might be new ways to do this that are more inclusive, sustainable, and long-term. So I was really keen to convene the three of you because you are all doers. And interestingly, I looked up the original meaning of the term entrepreneur, and it literally means in French to get things done, which I thought was interesting. But from my conversations with all of you, I think it's fair to say that to some extent, you're slightly reluctant entrepreneurs. There's a sense that the term doesn't quite sit comfortably with you. So I'd like to ask each of you in turn what the term entrepreneur means to you and to what extent you identify with it. And Bayo, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. Okay, so entrepreneur to me it just sounds like salesman immediately, and it just kind of makes me think of all the movies I watched growing up, all the TV shows that tell you what it's like when that's not what it's like at all. And honestly, I feel like it's a little bit hard to spell. So I just kind of go with founder, or I run a business, or well, more specifically, I run a nonprofit. So in terms of getting things done, yes, I call myself chief doer because my organization is called Do It Now, so it makes sense too. And my kind of mantra is just trying to make the best next decision at all times. And I think it does fit, but as a label in itself, I don't quite affiliate myself with it.
Great, thank you. And Alice?
Yeah, I think I probably have quite similar feelings to Bayo. There's a kind of ruthlessness that I associate with entrepreneurship. And interestingly, I read the antonym of ruthlessness is ruth, which is a biblical thing, which comes from like the idea of being compassionate. And I think as a social entrepreneur, it's definitely more of an emphasis on the compassionate side. It's this kind of weird thing of, I think of men in suits, and I'm really happy that since I started Pivot, I haven't had to wear a suit once. I mostly wear dungarees now. Yeah, so I suppose I identify as a founder, maybe a leader, but not really as an entrepreneur.
Thank you. And Sana?
I find that entrepreneur is a very interesting word and one that's changed, I suppose, over the years. So now when you hear or when I hear the word entrepreneur, it brings to mind, your very stereotypical kind of Mark Zuckerberg-esque, Elon Musk, the really kind of big, brand names that are out there. So, and with it there comes a certain image that's associated with that. The stories of the exceptions of rags to riches and the whole concept of that now being an entrepreneur is seen as sexy. It's all of a sudden you've got this, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur these days. And now you've got this new term of being, is it called a one-preneur, I think, or something along those lines? So where everybody, to some extent, calls themselves an entrepreneur. So I suppose it's really difficult to know what it means in this modern world, to be honest. But to me, the word entrepreneur has always meant someone who's innovative, so someone who's not afraid to go against the tide, to come up with something different, to come up with something novel, and realistically and more importantly, to actually get things done. Although I do think that now maybe that doesn't apply anymore, because as I said, being an entrepreneur is now seen as something that everybody wants a piece of. Everyone that's in uni, everybody that's having a job. It's like if you go on LinkedIn and you type in CEO or like founder, every single person on there is now a founder of something. So I don't really know how I feel about that term. And I don't really call myself an entrepreneur, to be honest. I call myself more of a founder, and maybe occasionally a thought leader, maybe I'm more of a visionary, but I don't really associate myself with this whole Elon Musk brand of entrepreneurship, of doing 60-hour or 100-hour weeks, and starting a little business in my bedroom, which all of a sudden becomes this behemoth of Facebook. So yeah, I mean, I would say I'd call myself more of a founder and very much of a social entrepreneur, if I had to, same as Alice.
Great, thank you. Really interesting. And Sana, I'd just like to pick up some of the things that you mentioned there, because we talk about, and actually there was a survey done asking young people, I think under 24, to name someone that came up for them when they were asked to name an entrepreneur. And many of the usual names came up: Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, most of them men. But actually, we know that most everyday entrepreneurs are shopkeepers, hairdressers, in local communities running small businesses. And so why do you think that there is this obsession with, some of those sort of the myths of entrepreneurship that you mentioned, the unicorns? And do you think it's important to change the narrative?
Yeah, I think it's really important to change the narrative. I think we've kind of entered this almost dangerous territory, I'd say, where we're focusing so much on all these successful entrepreneurs out there, and we define success by a very narrow margin, which is going towards your stereotypical accelerators, and then all of a sudden, raising millions and millions and millions in like fundraising rounds, and having, hopefully getting to an IPO, and that is the standard trajectory. And the reality is that it's not like that. We know that the stats are quite dismal in terms of how many businesses fail in the first, second, and third year. And those are kind of conversations that people no longer want to have. And there is so much emphasis on being an entrepreneur. There are all of these massive like Instagram pages with tens of thousands of followers, which just post about how great the CEO lifestyle is. And I think to an extent we need a bit of a reality check. The CEO lifestyle is not as it is presented to be. So yeah, I think I would definitely agree with you, Kelly, that we definitely need to reimagine not just what it means to be an entrepreneur, but also to bring some level of reality back into this CEO lifestyle, this entrepreneur myth that is now pervading it. And I think a lot of it comes from, we're living in like very uncertain times, and all of a sudden there's this whole idea of not being reliant on your first job and having the second source of income stream and having your own freedom. And that those are some of the things that underpin the entrepreneur myth, from what I, from my conversations with people that I have found, which is like a very, very interesting insight, and almost is a bit of it's a very sexy image that's presented. So, well, what do you do for a living? Oh, well, I'm a founder. It's all of a sudden every time, oh wow, what do you do? What does that mean? What does your day-to-day look like? So yes, I definitely think that we really need to reevaluate what we mean when we talk about entrepreneurship, and undoing some of that CEO myth that now exists.
And Bayo, you obviously with your work, it'd be great to hear a bit more about Do It Now, but you work with lots of small business owners who we might describe, warmly as everyday entrepreneurs. And do you believe that we can learn just as much from those founders and those people as we can from the big Steve Jobs-esque entrepreneurs?
I'm a big believer in looking around you, and as a new founder, individual founder, someone building a normal business or a small business, you can learn a heck of a lot more from the people that are building a similar business to you at a similar stage as you. Think you can learn from the more YouTube friendly, like Gary Vaynerchuk's, who have wonderful things to say that are motivational, but when you go like really sink down into what he's teaching, it's really likely that you won't be able to adopt those methodologies for yourself because he's building out of what he knows and what he has access to. I mean, as a tapping into the earlier conversation, I mean, when you aspire to be an entrepreneur and you see all these wonderful role models in the same way that you saw uh, Beyonce and Serena Williams and LeBron James and like David Beckham and all of these people that made you think the way to get success and get to doing what I love is to be an entertainer or to be a sports person. And if that was your option growing up, that's what you aspired to. And I think entrepreneurialism has kind of fallen into that celebrity status of I do what I love. I make my own decisions. I live on my own terms, and I happen to make a lot of money while doing it. And a lot of people have tapped into that. But when you kind of measure that with the reality of there were exactly 8 Black women that received venture capital funding in the past 10 years in the UK, you recognize that it's like that movie, he's just not that into you. Sometimes you're not the exception. Sometimes you are the rule, and you have to figure out what that looks like in your own life. And I think it's really important to have a good level of hope and enthusiasm for what you're doing, but also measure that with a really good dose of reality as to what it is that is actually available to you. Because otherwise, trying to be an entrepreneur, looking at the kind of celebrity entrepreneurs that are out there, leaves you unfortunately disappointed a lot of the time. And I know the thing is, if the saying we all, I'm sure, have heard 100 times is, if you don't love it, if you couldn't do it, if no one was paying you, you shouldn't be doing it in the first place, because entrepreneurialism is very, very hard, and you need to be able to motivate yourself even in the hard times. If your basis for it is a shallow, and I'm not accusing anyone of being shallow, but if in the sense of, if the depth of it comes entirely from representation or popularity of a kind of mode of living, then you're not going to be able to deal with things like so many fantastic entrepreneurs have been dealing with when it comes to things like COVID, where you see for us, I mean, within 6 weeks, all of our contracts were gone, like immediately, just wonderfully disappeared. And we had to kind of take a really good hard look at what we were doing and how we were doing it to be able to claw our way back. And I think that is entrepreneurialism. That's what being a business person is. It's about being able to innovate and build and keep doing it every single day, despite how difficult it is, because you believe in what you're trying to create in the world.
And moving on from the sort of the reality and the myths, Alice, can you talk to us a little bit more about Pivot? Because one of the things I know that you talk about with the vision of Pivot is being able to transform hostels and temporary accommodation into spaces of enterprise, which I love as a phrase. So can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that, about some of your makers and that story?
Yeah, so I suppose it kind of all began when I was working in the hostel as a progression and support worker, and my job was to try and get people into work. And there was a lot of willingness for people who wanted to work, but a lot of barriers that were stopping them. And I kind of had this belief that everyone really had the right to work, and more than that, they had the right to access meaningful work. And I think that our system basically disadvantages people who live in adverse ways to their access to work. So some of those barriers in this particular hostel, you have breakfast at 8 and you have dinner at 5. So you have restrictive times that you can work. You're then mostly everyone will be living on universal credit. So very small amount of cash in order to be able to get a bus to work, for instance. So I suppose I posed the question, was there a way to bring work or enterprise directly into hostels, thereby removing a lot of those barriers. And because of my background in architecture and making jewelry, I kind of thought, well, maybe that enterprise, we could pilot it with jewelry. So I suppose I always say this pivot is maybe not jewelry, but we're doing jewelry at the moment. And actually, if you can take work into hostels, what can that look like? So at the moment, it's a product that someone can make in their bedroom, but in the longer term, it could be workshops in hostels. And you, by creating places of making and maybe also selling, it kind of changes the dynamic of those spaces. They become a lot more positive, purposeful, and yeah, I suppose should I talk a bit about the makers, or
I'd love to hear, yeah, we'd love to hear about them.
At the moment, we work with 10 people in a hostel in North London, a mixture of men and women, all under the age of 35. They kind of, all their backgrounds are very varied. It's quite amazing, actually. I think for me, I never realized, I suppose, how diverse reasons are for ending up in those situations. But what's really great is that we work really well as a community, and there's a lot of peer-to-peer support which has arisen from doing what we're doing. So just as an ecosystem, people share tools and they share fixings for the jewelry, and yeah, it's been quite amazing. And we've been employing someone who was a maker in our office now 2 days a week, so he's become a team leader. So there's this maybe it's showing that that's how the business could go, that we can recruit from the people that we're already working with, to then, as we grow and expand.
Great, thanks, Alice. So we've talked a little bit about defining or redefining the term entrepreneurship and perhaps your discomfort with it a little bit. So now I'd like to talk a bit more about sort of who gets to be an entrepreneur and how that happens. And before we did that, we've already discussed maybe some of the entrepreneurs that typically get spoken about and held up as heroes. But I'd like to ask each of you to tell us about an entrepreneur that you really admire and why. And maybe we'll start with you, Sana. I think you're on mute, Sana.
You know, this is the great thing about being on Zoom all the time. You're just consistently spending time being like, you're on mute. You're like, okay, one sec, let me get myself off mute again. I said I was going to say that's a really difficult question you've asked me, Kelly. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that I admire, and a lot of them are actually people that I know, which rather than the very stereotypical kind of big brand ones. So it's really hard for me to pick one. But I can tell you about the individuals that I do know, and they're very much of your, you know, they're dreamers, in the sense that they want to see change happen, and there's a lot that they want to achieve, and their cause, their reason for doing this. A lot of it's driven by a cause. A lot of it's driven by a desire to see a better society, or to alleviate some form of, or to correct an issue that exists. And one of the and this person, one of the people that I know that I admire quite a lot actually is a mentor of mine. So he runs the startup called IFG, which is called the Islamic Finance Guru. And I happened to run into him maybe a year and a bit ago. And they started as a blog post. So they started as a blog site where they would just post a lot of advice around, you know, demystifying the world of finance for the average person, providing really, really good investment advice and how to become financially stable with the resources that you have. So rather than having to go to Barclays Bank with a net worth of, you know, 200k and then getting a private banker to do all of these things for you, they focus a lot on financial empowerment, which I think is such a great cause, because that's something that affects everyone. And the world of finance, a lot like the world of law, it's always quite mystical. It's quite difficult to penetrate. There's so many terms and there is so much jargon that you just don't understand. And I just love the way that they've been able to simplify this and bring it to a mass audience. And when I look at this, when I look at it as a business and I look at the founding team behind it, a couple of things stand out, and a lot of it comes from the type of people that they are. So they're visionaries, but they're very much focused on solving a need. And this small thing that they had been doing for the past 7 years is this consistent motivation to turn up and do this small little hustle that they had going on for years and years and years, and really focus on it before it became something a lot bigger. And now they have, lots and lots and lots of people that read their blog posts, and loads of hundreds of thousands of subscribers. But it wasn't always that way. And I just really admire the grit that went into it, which is one of the key findings of what it means to be, and to use the term entrepreneur, or to be a founder, is that grit. And every time I kind of see them, I'm like, wow, you guys are just incredible. So that would be mine.
Thank you. Same question to you, Bayo.
Well, for me, I also really value tenacity. And similarly, the people that I admire are always people that I know I could pick up a phone and I could call and have a conversation with. Because I do honestly think it's a waste of energy to put your hopes in someone that doesn't have the same life experience as you, because otherwise the barriers that you face are entirely different. So how do you know that you can comparably solve each other's problems or whatever? But in terms of picking one entrepreneur, it shifts and changes all the time. It really just depends on who I'm thinking of in the moment. But there's a fantastic friend of mine called Dayo who runs who's building a dating app for Black people globally. And just in conversations with her, it's just incredible to kind of have someone have all of this really deep insight into a specific thing and be incredibly passionate about it, and know so much about the business landscape and know so much about how everything works, and recognize the barriers that she's facing as a Black woman in this space, and also like constantly strategizing her way around them. And it's just like, it makes me feel like, okay, I'm not the only one that thinks like this, for one, but also she's just so much better than me. So I'm just like, I really want to just learn from you and like know how you're doing everything that you're doing. So I really appreciate having her in my life, and a number of other people that I'm sure will probably not like the fact that I didn't think of them first, but that's fine.
And Alice.
I was thinking about this earlier this morning, and the first person that I thought of was Meg Doherty, who did the same program as me year here a few years before, who I actually did my placement with. And the reason why I was thinking about Meg was because on Monday, when the reality of lockdown number 2 came into force, with lots of things being cancelled, I rang up Meg and said, I'm feeling really terrible. How are you doing? And she was so positive and so generous in the time that she took to speak to me. I was very I was very humbled, and I remembered what it was like working for her, because she's one of those people that, despite being super busy and spinning 15 plates at once, she always manages to find time for other people. And I think it's been a really good lesson for me, because I think that there's other people who are starting their journeys now who are a little bit further behind than I am. And so I'm also trying to be generous. And I think especially women for women is really important. And, opening doors for each other. And I think, yeah, we all have, we're, as a community, I think it's just really important.
Thank you.
And
it's really interesting.
Sorry, I was going to say, I should also say that she's the founder of Fat Macy's, which is a catering social enterprise.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. It's really interesting that you all chose people that you know, which I think further kind of reinforces this interesting, the everyday entrepreneur, and looking around you to see others and find inspiration in your communities. Bayo, you mentioned earlier the quite shocking figure of the number of Black women that have received investment in the past, I think you said 10 years. And we know that people of colour, and particularly Black people, are still underrepresented among the entrepreneur community and receive significantly less funding and investment. And what are some of the great things that you've seen that are helping to try and change this that you're also doing, but kind of what gives you hope?
I mean, over the past, I think 4 years before diversity and inclusion became a thing that people were hiring for or even seeking to build into their into the way that they do things, there were a number of organizations and communities that were starting up to, and we were one of them, I suppose, continue to be, that was starting up to address a problem that we were specifically finding. So I ran my first tech company while I was at university. I didn't know it was called a tech company. I was just building something and thought, hey, wouldn't this be fun? Because I was studying English literature and I only had 4 hours of lectures a week. So it felt like a waste of time not to do anything else. Um, so I was just doing that. And once I kind of left that behind and moved into work and all of these things, I started recognizing there were so many people in the world of work and otherwise that felt so out of place, particularly Black people that felt so out of place and unable to succeed in the way that they wanted to within their corporate career. And then recognize that the impetus for that corporate career was this is what I should be doing rather than this is what I want to be doing. And in that, you found that there were organizations that kind of sprung up around supporting Black people and people of color in general to find their passion and do it effectively. And that, because I think the tech world was a little bit stronger on encouraging these conversations, drove itself into the tech space a lot quicker. And now there are a lot of organizations that specifically focus on diversity and inclusion within the tech space. And you find initiatives supporting people to get jobs in tech, supporting people to raise finance, supporting people to become a little bit stronger in their understanding of the startup world. There are programs springing up every day to help people of color become venture capitalists, to help open up that scope of who gets to decide who gets money. And I mean, like I said, we're one of the organizations that do many of these different things, but it is encouraging, but at the same time, in the midst of COVID, it was very clear that, and this was in COVID pre-Black Lives Matter. So at that point, it was very clear that diversity and inclusion was still seen as a marketing opportunity and an investor relations or an internal communications experiment rather than an actual hope for the future. And that was disappointing, but not something I was particularly surprised by. So, I mean, it's encouraging that many things are happening, but it's still very much on unsteady footing in terms of where things are going to go, and which is why I strive for realistic communication about what this world is actually like and how slow it is to really change, because in a world that is determined entirely by profit and loss, uh, it is very difficult to get anyone to pay any attention to anything that doesn't immediately in the moment add to someone's bottom line. So for me, entrepreneurialism, being a founder, running your own thing, it comes from a willingness to be your own boss and a kind of a drive to be your own decision maker. But particularly within the tech space, you kind of have to think to yourself whether or not you are going to be the next wave that comes through. And if you are, fantastic, but the likelihood is that you're not. It's just numbers.
Thank you. And but talking of next waves, Sana, you co-founded Strive, which exists to address the imbalance of diversity in city law. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about Strive, but also your particular experience of founding something whilst training to be a lawyer, and how you navigated that sort of entrepreneurship story.
Sure. So I set up Strive during my final year exams. So I was I was in my last year of university doing my law degree, and I had exams coming up. And I just remember like diversity was something that was always at the forefront of my agenda ever since I got my training contract offer from the firm that I'm now with. And my own experiences of going through that process of trying to obtain a grad scheme in an industry that was very unfamiliar to me, because I don't really have any lawyers in the family. I don't really know any lawyers. I don't really have friends that know any lawyers. And I went to a school where, these kind of careers where, you heard the term lawyer, but generally majority of that used to be high street, small family law firm offices rather than big corporate city law. And the world of corporate law was, and the world of corporate generally was it was just such a whole different world to the world that I grew up in. So when I was navigating it, it really felt like I was coming at it from an entirely different place, which I was. I went from being this girl from northwest side of London that didn't have any exposure to anything to do with the city or anyone in the city, to all of a sudden trying to navigate an entire internship in this new industry, having not known anything about it in advance, having had no exposure to it in advance. And one of the things that I realized when I was doing that was the fact that I I always felt like I was the only one in the room. I was very, very different to the rest of the cohort in terms of not just the way that I look, and which which in itself is like a biggest thing, but also just in terms of my personal background, in the sense that I don't really come from a family of academics, lawyers, or bankers, or anything along those lines. That I attended a very local state school around the corner, like 5 minutes from my house. So it was just both in terms of looks, social diversity, and class. I was in a completely different category to the rest of my peers. So that was the thing that really kind of made me think that something needs to be done about this. And yes, there were organizations that were working on this, but I always felt that, we've been doing this for so many years. We've been talking about diversity for so many years. And if in 2017, which was the year when I was going through it, we haven't made that much progress, then something needs to be done. And also, these organizations were not targeting students like me, which was students that came from maybe a lower socioeconomic background, that were also belonging to a BAME category in terms of like their ethnicity and race and so forth. And in addition to that, various other socioeconomic factors that affected them. So we wanted to focus on, and the branding really behind Strive is true diversity rather than visible racial diversity. Which basically means you can pick up anyone that looks different but comes from a very, very similar background and therefore has a similar way of thinking as everybody else in the room. So we really wanted to bring diversity back to what it truly meant to be diverse. So this was the whole concept of Strive. So I set that up while my exams were happening, and then later on it became while I was training to be a lawyer, which I didn't really have much time to do this. But when we set it up, the whole thing just sprang up overnight, essentially. So we launched it, myself and my co-founder, we launched it in about 2 days. And then, a year from our launch date, we went on to win a national diversity award against a whole load of other very well established law firms just a year on from our establishment. So it's been a very, very exciting journey, but it's been a really difficult journey in the sense that the standard route of entrepreneurship tends to be, you go to uni, normally you'll start a business idea, join an accelerator, work on it full time. But I wasn't really looking to become an entrepreneur. I didn't set out to join an accelerator and work on it full time. I just saw a problem that had to be solved. And that's where the whole thing came out from. So going through that then opened my eyes to a whole lot of other problems within the entrepreneur space itself, which is what happens if you're a founder like me who doesn't have financial backing, who doesn't have a family of a history of entrepreneurship behind them and no connections in this new world. So it was a little bit of an interesting journey where I was looking to address an imbalance in corporate law, and then I find myself in a situation where I then started to identify imbalance within the space that I was currently in. So yeah, but it's been a very, very exciting journey. And I'm learning things every single day, but it has been very unconventional, to say the least.
Thank you for sharing that. And we've talked a little bit about, while we're on the topic of sort of who the perception of who gets to be an entrepreneur and the reality. I also think it was interesting, Alice, I read in Entrepreneur magazine that there's obviously a media fascination with the stories of successful, youthful entrepreneurs that we touched on at the start, but actually millennials are apparently less likely to want to start a business than their parents' generation were. And I just wondered what you thought some of the barriers to that might be.
I thought this was a really interesting question, Kelly, because I was actually speaking to a load of my friends who are turning 30 this year about whether or not they wanted to start businesses, and everyone was like, absolutely not. And actually the conversation, I was sat around the table and everyone seemed to be about to buy a house or had bought a house and were paying mortgages, and I'm the only one who's not, and I will continue to live this penniless life until maybe Pivot becomes more successful. But we're only 9 months old, so I won't complain too much. But I think if I think about my parents who both started their own businesses, they were able to move to London in the 1970s and buy houses in post-war slum London, like parts of it where they could live cheaply, and then that made a huge difference. And I think today people of my generation are often driven by the need to earn money, and kind of irregardless of whether the work that they do brings them joy or happiness, because actually they're living for the weekends and for other parts. I think it's a thing that I feel most honored about in the work that I now do, is that I really genuinely enjoy every day, well, most days that I work. But I think that to be an entrepreneur, you need to take risks. And I think risk taking is so tied to financial freedom. And so that comes from a place of being privileged. And I think that's probably like the major barrier. People are most likely to live more comfortably if they're not going out alone. And maybe I'm grossly generalizing, but I'd say the thing that was really amazing about Year Here was that it created a situation of safety, not financial safety, but a kind of metaphorical womb in which to feel that I could go and take those risks.
Thank you. And we talked a bit about redefining and the sort of who, but I want to move on a bit to the do, as we're a group of doers, and reimagining ways in which we might sort of do entrepreneurship or create the conditions for it. And Bayo, I know that through the work you do, and also I think previously to founding Do It Now, you participated on and ran sort of incubators or accelerators for entrepreneurs, and I wondered if you had any thoughts on what sort of the key ingredients might be from your experience of doing that to kind of creating the conditions for successful impact entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship more generally. I think you're on mute.
If you don't mind, I'll link it to the answer that Alice just gave, because I think I work exclusively with Black entrepreneurs, and on occasion when we're designing something for someone else with people of color. So we're always working with communities that are deemed marginalized within the entrepreneurial ecosystem in general. So my experience and insight will always come from that space. What I found, and I first noticed it between 2017 and 18, I moved to Nigeria for 8 months because I wanted to. I'm generally passionate about underserved entrepreneurs, and I was like, Nigeria, Africa, this is where we want to be to build this thing. And we still do a lot of work with African entrepreneurs. I just figured out that it was actually easier to do it from here than there because of a number of different infrastructural barriers. But that was my first time living in Nigeria as an adult and actually like watching the news to watch it. And it was the first time I'd seen a daily segment on building a side hustle on the national news. Like 6 o'clock news, everyone's watching TV to figure out what's happening in the country. And there is a daily segment on how to build a side hustle. Because with so much financial insecurity, that is a key option. That is the thing that you need to be doing to ensure that you are stable. So on the flip side, entrepreneurship is an opportunity for security as opposed to a risk of your security. And that was the first time I really understood that from the Nigerian perspective. But when I moved back to the UK, I recognized it in our beneficiaries as well. Because when you look at people that are trying to move up in their corporate sphere, uh, not anecdotally, well researched, Black people tend to get fired within the first 3 years of their like consultancy or whatever, like large company, because they are not being given enough opportunities to progress in their organization, but then they're told that they're just not working hard enough. And when you listen to enough of those stories, it can't be the same. It can't be true that everyone is just apparently quite lazy. Um, and you kind of find that people then go off, start a consultancy of their own that is entrepreneurial, that gets all this stuff done, and then they go back as a senior manager to those corporations or similar corporations that said, you just didn't have the it factor for us. Whereas there's just a lot of bias happening within the organization as to who gets the good work and who gets the great projects and the advanceable type things. So when you look at what Black entrepreneurs specifically are looking for when you look at incubators, accelerators, and so on, they're looking for a level of respect as to the experience that they're bringing in, because the types of people that seek to start a job, start an entrepreneurial career or become a founder of something, for Black people are typically extremely well educated people who've had to enter into entrepreneurship. I mean, the people that are applying for incubators and accelerators are seeking to engage in this ecosystem, because otherwise you're just not really engaged, which about 70% of the population that is starting a business is not engaged in this incubator accelerator kind of world at all. But the Black people that do seek to engage are extremely well educated, have fantastic professional careers that they have had to leave or are seeking to leave because they don't see a forward progression happening, and are looking for this opportunity to start something that will be able to give them enough of a name for themselves that they can then go back and change that industry that has kind of scorned them in some way or another. So it's really about recognizing that they expect different things. I mean, and the level of passion that they have for what they're doing is going to be different because they recognize that this is their option. It's not a risk, it's an opportunity. So it's about like, this is the way that I'm going to finally succeed, and almost stick it to the people that told me that I couldn't. So for us, when it's about leveling the playing field for those kinds of, for incubators and accelerators that we consult with, it's about helping them recognize that what they think a Black entrepreneur isn't necessarily what a Black entrepreneur actually is, and opening the door for those two different types of entrepreneurs: the people that don't really know what they're doing, can maybe don't have the motivation that you think they would have or whatever, and the people that are just like, actually, I mean, I've been on the same program as people that went to like Harvard and Yale, and we're like, and we're on the same boat. Okay. I mean, like, it's about recognizing that there is no one size fits all, and we often exceed expectations or flout expectations of what we should be like and should be engaging with and should be passionate about. So empowering people as individuals to kind of level out within that space that you're creating is really important, and speaking to people as much as possible before they enter into your program to see what they need is extremely important as well.
Thank you. And Sana, I think some of that might have been interesting for you, because I know that you're in the sort of early stages of reimagining or thinking about sort of the traditional accelerator models, taking your learnings from Strive and elsewhere. And I just wondered if you had any reflections on that and what Bayo's just shared.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that Bayo's just said, I absolutely agree with. That there isn't actually one size that fits all, and the way that we currently do entrepreneurship in terms of the current accelerator model, that maybe it does need a bit of a revamp, because we're essentially applying a blanket approach to all these founders that are coming through, not recognizing that every single founder has, and every single startup, in fact, has different needs, and they have different strengths, and they're operating in very, very different industries. And it's a problem when the people that are running these accelerators, they exist in certain industries only, which of course happens, and therefore they don't really have enough knowledge or insight of other industries that these founders might be bringing in, and therefore cannot really identify the opportunities that exist in that niche. And I think I remember reading, and perhaps Bayo is definitely more aware of this, but I remember reading an article about a founder that wanted to launch a hair care brand, and accessories for Black females. And when she approached the VCs for fundraising, they didn't really recognize that as an opportunity. They didn't really see that as a problem, and they didn't really understand what it was that her business was trying to achieve. And issues like that are prevalent across industry, because when we look at the top level of who are the VCs and we look at who are the investors, they all fit a certain, they all fit a certain class of people. And in order to, and that's where the money's coming from, right? So we need to change a lot of things in the space. Primarily, we need to change the people that hold the money. So the investor board itself, the investor base, the people that are running the accelerators, do they have the understanding of these other niche industries? And the truth is that unless you're from a particular background, you're not going to understand these industries. A Muslim founder can understand the challenges faced by the Muslim community. A Black founder can understand the challenges faced by the Black community, because they've lived it and they've seen it and they've experienced it. And if we want to see more diversity in this venture space, that's what needs to happen. We need to change diversity at the top end of the spectrum, as well as at the bottom end of the spectrum, so that the talent that flows through is more diverse, and then on the flip side is met with a corresponding diverse board and base of investors and advisors and mentors. And then in terms of the way that which then leads me to the second part, which is the way that we're actually applying the one size fits all approach, that maybe it's time for us to reconsider how we do things. And Strive is all about doing things differently. And one of the things that I learned from Strive is this whole concept of having these these assumptions that accelerators typically make when it comes to investments. So for instance, when we're looking at founder profiles, where do we place an emphasis on where this founder studied? So, a founder that has an MBA is much more likely to get investment than a founder that just simply has a degree, simply because they've got an MBA. A founder that has an MBA from Cambridge, Harvard, or Oxford, that apparently somehow makes it easier, that brings them confidence from investors that this is a good founder, when in reality, being a founder, or indeed being good at anything, is a lot less to do with your degree and where you studied, and a lot more to do with the kind of person that you are. And this is very, very reflective of what we do with Strive, where we're taking students that don't have the best grades and they haven't gone to Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard, or universities that are very, very well known and established within law, and yet are performing and are attaining grad schemes with the leading law firms globally. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that actually, I always believed in it, that grades have very little to do with your success, but running Strive really kind of made me believe that, in the sense that it really brought out the fact that whatever I believed in was true, and it was in fact validated. And then applying that to the founder space, I think that is more true than ever before, that you can't judge a founder by where they went, but about how they do things and their product itself and the way that they think. And really the biggest quality of all is grit, the ability to innovate and pivot quite quickly, but the underlying feature of it all is grit and execution. And those are the two things that make an excellent founder. And those two things cannot necessarily be found by or identified just by saying that this founder went to Harvard. And then there's this other, and forgive me if I'm going on for too long, but then there is another point about this, which is all about what happens when you take founders out of this space, right? What happens when you've got these founders that have gone from accelerator to accelerator, and they've been supported at every single stage of the process with a very intensive workings that have been happening on their product, on their service, and their ability to scale, where essentially a lot of that work has been it's been very, very intensive input from the accelerators themselves. So what happens when they kind of exit that and then they need to do things themselves? And I think, Kelly, we were talking about this, how in fact the way that approach may not be sustainable for the long term, but it's just the fact that we've been doing it for so long that that's become the industry default. And I think it's about time that we considered other ways of doing it, and finding something that is sustainable, workable, and most importantly accessible to an underrepresented group of founders.
Absolutely, thank you for those reflections. And I think it's fair to say that we know that we've talked sort of generally about incubators and accelerators, and we know that they're not all created equal. And I'd be really keen to hear from you, Alice. I know that you've participated on programs and had mentoring, and I was interested to read, there's an author called David Sachs who's written a book called The Soul of an Entrepreneur, and he talks a little bit about how there's been a bit of a paint by numbers approach to entrepreneurship, that there's somehow this magic formula for growth, scale and impact. And we've already raised in this discussion that growth, scale might not be the most important things. So Alice, I just wondered what you'd reflect on on your experience of the balance between, that is there a sort of over-programmed nature to how these things might be achieved, and what your experience has been having come through a program that supports that, and now being out there on your own. And I'd just be really interested to hear your reflections.
I suppose, like, perversely, the nature of entrepreneurship is about innovation. So I suppose frameworks are set up to allow you to innovate within them, which is quite strange. So how can a framework be static in that scenario? I think the learning that I got from Year Here is the only program that I've done, the year-long program, and then the incubator afterwards, which was cut short because of COVID. But I suppose that whole program was about learning how to be innovative and be agile. So I don't think there is a kind of formula to success or growth. And I think particularly for me, lots of people have been asking me recently, like, what is your long-term plan? And what are you, what's your year-long roadmap looking like? And I just have to say, well, I'm living day to day at the moment because of COVID. So everything actually has to be really reactionary. And so I think that there's a skill within that where you can be super agile. You can be agile to the extent that you don't get too emotional when things disappear, which you were expecting to happen. But that's kind of the greatest learning that I have taken from the process of being on that incubator. And I think it's made me think really strongly about joining another one if I do. And there's been offers and conversations recently. And I think often now that I'm not sure if I want to do it, just because of the amount of time that they take up. And actually a day a week, 2 days a week of having lectures and learning about things is great. But actually, I've got 50 parcels I need to send, or I need to upload content onto the website, or write a blog, or ring a maker because they've gone AWOL for 2 weeks. And there's practical day-to-day things that actually, for me, I'm kind of like, I really like the independence that I'm doing it alone at the moment.
Thank you. And as we look ahead, then we're reflecting on how things are happening now, and different ways we might reimagine that. So Bayo, there's obviously, we've talked a little bit about the impact that COVID has had, and also you've mentioned Black Lives Matter, and we also know that the climate crisis is impending and around us. And so are you hopeful that some of those crises we've experienced will actually accelerate and help to forge new ventures that are led by people that represent more diverse communities and backgrounds, and actually, that are almost, whether it's through an appetite for risk and making an impact, or actually through necessity of having to find other ways in which to support their communities and support themselves financially? Are you hopeful about the fact that, you know, into 2021 and beyond, that we'll have some more and new impactful ventures being run by our reimagined entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. I was actually speaking to some animal rights activists a couple of weeks ago about how we could potentially get more Black people to know about animal rights issues so that they could develop innovations that would solve the problem from a different perspective. Because if you have more different perspective having people looking at the same problem, you'll have more interesting solutions and probably a wider scope. So I the the kind of difference being that beyond Peter in that context, there isn't really any other long-term populist pop culture reference for that movement. Whereas with climate change, with Black Lives Matter, the number of other things that are happening, free school meals, a couple of years ago, period poverty, there are a lot of things that have kind of become natural language within our culture, and that engages more people that wouldn't typically think about or know about an issue to become passionate about that issue. And the people that are more inclined to enter into entrepreneurial activities, the people that have that kind of mindset. And I do believe not everybody is meant to be an entrepreneur. There are people that will test something out and then go back to a senior level position at their job, and that is entirely valid and well done to you if you can make that work for you, because a steady salary is always a good thing. But do you think that with all of the things that are happening and people becoming more and more aware, particularly in these lockdowns of like having all of this information and nowhere to turn, there is a lot more scope for people that haven't typically been engaged directly into these conversations? Because I mean, if you think about the third sector, there is a very specific demographic of people that is asked to support causes or marketed to support causes, and they're usually female, mid 30s or early, kind of around the 30 mark, white, and living in Greater London or kind of a suburbia kind of world, where there is an assumption about your capacity to take on more. And if when things kind of hit that popular medium of like it's everywhere, people that typically wouldn't have been marketed directly to take part in a conversation about a specific subject are then enticed to, because they kind of mirror something about climate change to something that's happening in their own life, and see themselves as an opportunity to either educate their friends and family or their local community or become more active in the wider scope of things. So I'm definitely expecting a lot more people to become entrepreneurs, and I'm seeing it already, with our numbers certainly jumping up in terms of people seeking support from us. But I'm also really encouraged by the willingness for movements to work together to become more actively diverse. Like I said, speaking to animal rights activists, speaking to workers' rights activists, speaking to a number of different activism lived groups, and also trying to figure out how we, as a Black focused organization that focuses entirely on engaging Black people to innovate in new spaces, can engage with those movements to be able to ensure that Black people are supported in engaging in those problems and bringing their own solutions to it. Um, I will say that in those moments, there is a need to do things differently, because, like I say, a highly educated, super autonomous Black person that is looking to use entrepreneurialism as a stepping stone to a future career is not going to want to be in a lecture room for 2 days a week, being kind of held by the hand every single moment of it, and they're going to want something different. And I think there is something to be said for venture studios. I know there's a few more popping up here and there. Crisis has one now, as well as a charity. And we're developing our own venture studio and looking at what we could do with the learnings that we've gotten to be able to support people in a much more agile kind of way, while also empowering them to start enterprises that have a high likelihood of getting funded. So basically reverse engineering from the kind of VC side of things down to the angel side of things, then looking at what idea and what kind of founder are we looking for to engage in this problem solving. So I mean, we always look at the ecosystem approach, and I apologize for being rather negative or seeming rather negative about people's chances of VC and chances of succeeding within the tech space. I think it's because we so often, as you're told as a founder by the Gary Vaynerchuks, by the everybody else, to do what you're passionate about, and it makes sense too. But if what you're passionate about lives on the edge of what VCs are willing to fund, or is outside of the scope of what VCs are willing to fund, then you're not going to build something that will get funded. And that's what people of color, particularly Black people, particularly Black women, tend to be building. We tend to be building things that solve problems for other Black women. So as Sana said earlier, if the people on the other side of the table don't understand that, then as a founder, your trajectory is cut short quite abruptly. So understanding what we're trying to do is basically say, okay, where are the VCs? Where is their thesis? Not them as individuals, but what are they investing in as a rule based on what they've raised money for? And how can we tap into that to ensure that more Black people are able to build things that solve a problem they're passionate about in a methodology that VCs are willing to invest in? And I mean, we're in the early stages of that. I've just been having the most incredible conversations recently about putting that together to launch next year. And hopefully other people will, with the money and resources, will beat me to the punch and we can learn from them. But I'm looking forward to testing that out over the next couple of years and seeing who we can help get funding.
Amazing. And no apologies for reality checks. It's a constructivist and pragmatic conversation that's been brilliant. And actually looking at the time, there's so much more that we could talk about. But just before we go, as you may be aware, we end each podcast with the new P&L to the point section, where we ask guests to provide 1 or 2 key takeaways that listeners can think about and apply to their businesses when it comes to principles and leadership in business, especially in times of crisis like now. So I'm going to ask each of you, what would those key takeaways be from your perspective? And I'll start with Sana.
I think the most important thing is to, and I know people have really, it sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but to think about your why, which is not just why are you doing it, but why did you start in the first place? What was the main reason behind why you set out on this unnecessary, as some people might call it, extremely difficult, horrendously complicated, lonely journey? Why did you begin that process? And I think that's really important to keep your eyes on the vision that you had when you first started out. And of course, it's important for that vision to change, but the underlying point of that vision, I think, remains constant. The problem that you wanted to resolve, that remains constant. And I think it's really, really important to not lose focus of that as you go through, especially when things aren't working out. Because we've talked about the challenges of being an entrepreneur, but actually, when you first start out, you might not make any money for the first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, maybe even longer than that. I mean, I know entrepreneurs that are still going at it, and they still haven't made money, and it's been 6, 7 years down the line. And that is a very real reality thing that's happening in terms of the whole like profit aspect. So when that happens, to think about that whole why thing. And I think it sounds very like Simon Sinek-esque to be talking about this, but it really resonates with me. So that's the first one. And the second one is actually, everyone talks about focusing on the founder. And when you go to VCs, one of the first things that they'll look for is the founder. Like, is the founder charismatic? Is the founder ability to get people on side? Is the founder this, that, and the other? And a whole list of criteria that the founder is assessed against. But I think more importantly, you need to look at your team. So is your team, because you can be a great founder, but if you do not have a great team, you're not going to get very far. So consistently, if you have a good team, to value that team and to make sure that your team is behind you and they back your mission and they back what it is that you're trying to do. And not only do they back it, but they are executing as you're going along. So those are my 2 things: focus on your why and focus on your team.
Thanks, Sana. Alice, your reflections and takeaways now, please.
I can think of so many things. I was going to say ride the wave, because Pivot incorporated 49 days before the UK went into national lockdown, and we're still alive, and we're actually growing. And I think it's there are so many moments this year where I could have given up and I didn't, and I am gritting my teeth and hoping to get through. And there is a promise of a world beyond this pandemic where hopefully we will have a bit of an easier life. Everyone who's involved with Pivot, that's the makers, that's the people who work in the office, that's me, like everyone is suffering in different ways, as is the world. I'd also I'm going to be controversial and say don't overplan, because I've found that it's actually been kind of throwing away the 5-year plan, throwing away the year-long plan has been good for my mental state, in that, like, actually we're going to live day to day, we're going to be reactive, and not, you know, if for me, I think if we were to over plan, it could just result in lots of disappointments. So to work on a kind of week by week, day by day basis, it means that we can be as agile as possible. And again, like, very lucky because we're so young. It means that we are a beast which can be agile. So maybe ask me the same question in 5 years' time.
Well, I'm sure Paul would be delighted to have you back. And finally, Bayo.
Okay, so I think I just have one for you, because I said my other one earlier on, which I think Alice just said as well. Focus on making the best next decision. That is pretty much my daily life. But the one that has been my personal mantra, and has really just stuck with me over the years, is basically, it's so much more important who you are than how successful you are, or even what you do. And kind of not losing sight of the fact that you're going to have to live with every single decision and the consequences of those decisions for the rest of your life. Like, if there is a diary of every decision that you made, that is going to stick with you, and people are going to know this about you, and you're going to know about yourself, like, you're going to have to live with all of those decisions. So honestly, I I kind of work on that focus of, I have to be happy with myself at the end of the day, which is why I negotiate differently. I put all of my cards on the table at the first jump, and I say, hey, this is it. I'm not going to try and backstab you. I'm not going to try and organize around you. This is what I'm dealing with. I expect you to make a sensible offer or a sensible negotiation based on this information. Because I know that, I mean, I think what happened was, when I was younger, I recognized that a presidential term, or like a prime minister term, it's 4 to 5 years. It's such a short period of time, but you're known by that period of time for so long. And then when I looked at my life, I was like, well, this job or whatever it is I'm doing, it's not my entire life. I'm going to have to live after this is done. And if I do things that make the rest of my life afterwards, even if I'm an entrepreneur until I'm 50 or 70 or whatever, there is a rest of my life afterwards. And I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of all the decisions I made and the way I treated people. So I try to take every day as like, okay, no matter how hard this is, it's me. I'm a human being, and I'm going to live through this no matter what it turns out to be. So who I am is so much more important than whether or not we get the deal, or whether or not we get like a little bit less of a like a discount, or a little bit less of a good, like, negotiation, whatever. I want to know that I can wake up the next day and be like, no matter what that person did, I did the best that I could possibly do in that situation.
Thank you. Some wonderfully human perspective at a very strange time in the world. So thank you. A huge thank you to all of my guests today. Thank you for your time, your wisdom, your insights. If you'd like to learn more about what Bayo, Sana and Alice do, please check out their websites and links in the notes that will come with the podcast. As I mentioned in the introduction, please do take a moment to review us. We genuinely appreciate it, and it does make a difference. And if you'd like to subscribe, please go to www.principlesandleadership.com. If you'd like to propose a topic or a guest for the new P&L, please fill in the contact form on the website. Finally, I'm Kelly Bewers, guest host of the new P&L. Thank you once again for listening, and have a great day.